Jim Rohn is often called the father of modern personal development. His speeches are everywhere on YouTube, clipped and remixed into motivational videos that rack up millions of views. Even if you've never heard his name, you've probably heard his words. Quotes like, "You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with," or "Don't wish it were easier, wish you were better," circulate daily across social media. For many, Rohn's wisdom feels timeless, a guiding voice for anyone who wants to improve their life. But here's the thing. While Jim Rohn's advice can inspire and sometimes push you in the right direction, not everything he said holds up when tested against real life. Some of it works brilliantly, some of it oversimplifies human struggles. And if we want to grow without getting trapped in hype, we need to separate the gold from the glitter. Let's start with the strengths. One of Rohn's most powerful messages is about personal responsibility. He constantly reminded people that you can't wait for life to get easier. He said, "You cannot change the wind, but you can change the set of your sails." That metaphor hits hard because it's true. Too often people get stuck blaming circumstances, the economy, their boss, their parents, the government, for everything that goes wrong. And while outside forces absolutely affect our lives, Rohn's philosophy pushes us to look at what we can control instead of what we can't. That kind of mindset shift is practical and empowering. Another strength of Rohn's teaching is his focus on self-education. One of his most famous lines is, "Formal education will make you a living. Self-education will make you a fortune." That statement has aged remarkably well. In today's world, where skills matter more than degrees, self-education is more powerful than ever. Think about how many people have changed their lives by learning online, starting businesses, or picking up new skills outside of school. Rohn was ahead of his time in pushing people to keep learning long after graduation. These ideas, responsibility and self-education, are the kind of wisdom you can build your life on. But here's where things start to break down. Rohn often made success sound like a formula that works the same way for everyone. He said things like, "Success is predictable." The idea being that if you adopt the right philosophy and habits, success will naturally follow. On the surface, this is motivating. It makes people feel like they are in control of their destiny. But in reality, life is far less predictable than Rohn made it sound. For example, 2 people can adopt the exact same habits, reading daily, working hard, networking, and end up with very different outcomes. Why? Because success depends not just on mindset and habits, but also on timing, resources, opportunities, and sometimes sheer luck. Not everyone starts from the same place. Some people have safety nets, connections, or capital to fall back on, while others are starting from zero. To say that success is predictable oversimplifies the struggles many people face. Here's a story that illustrates this. Jason, a young man I once knew, became obsessed with Jim Rohn's seminars. He bought every tape, attended every workshop, and memorized entire speeches. He truly believed that if he absorbed Rohn's philosophy, his life would transform. And in some ways it did. He felt more confident, more positive, more motivated. But here's the problem. He never took concrete steps toward his goals. He didn't start the business he dreamed of, didn't build the skills he needed, and didn't make the tough choices required to grow. He confused listening with doing. Years later, he admitted, "I thought I was changing, but really I was just consuming." That's the trap of motivation. It makes you feel like you're moving forward when you're actually standing still. Rohn's words lit a fire in Jason's mind, but he never used that fire to fuel action. This is not Jim Rohn's fault directly. He never told people to stop acting. But the way his words get consumed often leads people into the cycle of endless inspiration without execution. There's another issue with Rohn's philosophy: guilt. When he says things like, "Success is predictable," or "You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with," it makes people feel fully responsible for their outcomes. And while taking ownership is important, this kind of messaging can backfire. Imagine someone working 2 jobs just to pay rent. Imagine someone dealing with health issues or family crises. To tell them success is fully in their hands, and if they aren't thriving, it's because they didn't set their sails correctly, can be crushing. It can make people blame themselves for circumstances that are genuinely beyond their control. Does that mean Rohn's advice is useless? Absolutely not. But it does mean we need to take it with balance. His words are like tools, powerful when used in the right context, but dangerous when applied blindly. Think of it this way. If Rohn tells you, Don't wish it were easier, wish you were better. That's a challenge to grow. And that's good. But if you use that phrase as a hammer to beat yourself up for every failure, it becomes toxic. The trick is to apply his wisdom where it makes sense and pair it with realism about life's unpredictability. At the end of the day, Jim Rohn was a brilliant communicator. His real genius wasn't just in the content of his ideas, but in how he delivered them. He had a way of packaging timeless truths into short, memorable quotes that stick in your mind. That's why people still share them decades later. But if all you do is collect those quotes like souvenirs, nothing in your life will change. The value of his words only shows up when you act on them. So here's the first big takeaway. Don't treat Jim Rohn's philosophy like a guaranteed formula. Treat it like a toolkit. Some tools you'll use often, others you'll put aside, and you'll need to combine his tools with your own experiences, skills, and actions to actually build something meaningful. Let's dig deeper into some of Jim Rohn's most famous teachings, because this is where we start to see both the brilliance and the blind spots. One of Rohn's signature ideas is that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. This quote has become so popular that it's practically a law of personal development. On the surface, it makes sense. If you're constantly around people who are negative, lazy, or unmotivated, chances are their habits and attitudes will rub off on you. Likewise, if you're around ambitious, disciplined, and creative people, you'll likely start raising your own standards. There's truth in this, but let's test it against real life. For many people, it's not realistic to simply cut off everyone in their lives who isn't highly successful. Imagine a young adult living at home with parents who don't understand entrepreneurship, or someone in a small town where very few people are chasing big goals. According to Rohn's idea, they're doomed unless they completely change their environment. But that's not always possible. What about single parents who can't just abandon their families to seek out a new top 5? The deeper truth is this. While your environment does shape you, you are not powerless in a bad environment. You can choose who influences you by curating what you read, watch, and listen to. If your local circle isn't inspiring, you can build a virtual circle through books, podcasts, or online communities. Rohn's point is valid, but the way it's often applied creates unnecessary guilt and unrealistic expectations. Another one of his famous lines is, "Work harder on yourself than you do on your job." This advice can be powerful. It reminds people that long-term growth comes from investing in their skills, not just clocking in hours at work. It's what pushes people to start reading, learning, and building side hustles. But again, let's be real. For someone working 12-hour shifts just to survive, the idea of working harder on yourself can feel out of touch. Yes, it's important to invest in yourself, but not everyone has the same time, energy, or resources to do so. This highlights the bigger issue with Rohn's philosophy. It was often built for people who already had some privilege, some stability, or at least a margin of safety in their lives. It's great advice for someone who has evenings free to read books and extra money to attend seminars, but for the person grinding every day just to make ends meet, it can come across as pressure rather than inspiration. And yet, despite these flaws, people still find tremendous value in Rohn's words. Why? Because his core message is simple. You have more control over your life than you think. And even if success is not guaranteed, taking responsibility and building habits will always put you in a better position than waiting for luck or blaming others. Now, let's address another common trap: the overconsumption of Rohn's material. If you search YouTube right now, you'll find endless playlists of Jim Rohn speeches cut into 10-minute clips with dramatic music. Millions of views, thousands of comments saying things like, "This changed my life," or "I listen to this every morning." But here's the uncomfortable truth. Listening to a motivational speech every day doesn't change your life. It makes you feel like change is happening, but unless you actually apply what you hear, nothing changes. This is the same problem people had with Think and Grow Rich and other self-help classics. Motivation becomes entertainment. People keep listening, keep watching, keep taking notes, but they don't take action. And in some ways, the motivation itself becomes addictive. You start chasing the feeling of inspiration instead of chasing results. Let me share another story. Maria, a young professional, used to listen to Jim Rohn every morning on her way to work. She felt empowered, like she was on the verge of a breakthrough. She told herself she was working on herself. But when I asked her what she was actually doing differently, she struggled to answer. She hadn't started the project she'd been dreaming of. She hadn't learned the skill she'd been talking about for months. She was consuming motivation like fast food, quick energy, no nourishment. It wasn't until she turned off the videos and started focusing on daily habits that her life actually began to change. This doesn't mean Jim Rohn's speeches aren't valuable. They are. They can light a fire under you. They can shift your perspective in powerful ways. But they are only the first step. Real change begins the moment you close the video and start doing the work. And this brings us to another critique. Rohn often spoke in absolutes. If you don't design your own life plan, chances are you'll fall into someone else's. Discipline is the bridge between goals and accomplishment. These are powerful lines, but they make life sound simple, almost mechanical. Follow the rules, get the results. But anyone who has lived long enough knows life is not that simple. Sometimes you do everything right and still fail. Sometimes discipline doesn't guarantee accomplishment. That doesn't mean his words aren't helpful. It just means they're incomplete. Success requires more than discipline, more than environment, more than mindset. It requires adaptability, resilience, and sometimes sheer luck. So here's the truth. Jim Rohn gave people hope and clarity, but he didn't give them the full picture. And that's okay, no one can. The problem is when people treat his words like unshakable laws instead of motivational guidelines. The way to honor his legacy is not by memorizing his quotes, but by applying them with balance. Take his advice seriously, but not literally. Use it as fuel, not as a formula. Now let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture of Jim Rohn's influence. Because while it's easy to point out flaws in his philosophy, we also need to acknowledge why he mattered, and why his words continue to resonate decades after his passing. Rohn wasn't just another motivational speaker. He was a storyteller. He had a way of taking complex ideas about discipline, responsibility, and mindset, and turning them into simple, memorable phrases. That's part of why he influenced people like Tony Robbins, who went on to build billion-dollar businesses in the self-help industry. Rohn's ability to make personal growth sound practical and urgent is why his legacy endures. But here's the catch. When someone becomes a legend, their words often get taken out of context. Clips get trimmed down, quotes get plastered on social media, and suddenly people are consuming sound bites instead of substance. Jim Rohn didn't just say discipline is the bridge between goals and accomplishment. He also talked about patience, strategy, and balance. But those parts aren't as catchy, so they get ignored. What spreads online is the hype, not the nuance. This is where the danger lies. When young people only hear the highlights, they think success is a straight road paved by discipline alone. They believe that if they just cut out distractions, work hard, and surround themselves with the right people, success is guaranteed. But then reality hits. They fail a few times. They face setbacks they didn't see coming. And because they believed the formula was foolproof, they blame themselves entirely, thinking they weren't disciplined enough or strong enough. This is the silent trap of motivational content. It shifts all responsibility onto the individual while ignoring the bigger systems at play. Not everyone has the same opportunities, the same resources, or the same starting point. Jim Rohn hinted at this but didn't dive into it deeply. That's why people need to approach his teachings with balance. Let's make this practical. Imagine two people, Alex and Jordan. Alex comes from a middle-class background, has supportive parents, and a safety net. Jordan grew up struggling, with no financial cushion and no family support. Both hear Jim Rohn say, success is something you attract by the person you become. They both decide to work on themselves. Alex has access to courses, mentors, and free time. Jordan, on the other hand, is working 2 jobs and barely has time to rest. Who do you think sees results faster? It's not that Jordan is less capable. It's that Jordan's circumstances make the journey harder. But if Jordan only listens to the motivational message, they might start believing they're the problem. And that's the hidden flaw. Motivation should empower people, not make them feel like failures for struggling in tougher conditions. So what's the solution? It's about redefining motivation. Instead of treating it like a magic bullet, we need to treat it like a spark. Jim Rohn's words can inspire you to start, but they won't finish the race for you. It's your daily habits, your persistence, your adaptability, and yes, sometimes your luck that will carry you forward. Think of motivation as the caffeine in your morning coffee. It wakes you up. It gives you energy. But if you only drink coffee and never eat real food, you'll eventually crash. Motivation is the same. It energizes you, but you need skills, discipline, strategy, and support to sustain progress. And this is exactly why we created Unhyped. Because too many people are stuck in the cycle of chasing motivational highs. They binge-watch speeches, repeat affirmations, and feel fired up. But months later, nothing in their life has changed. We're here to break that cycle, not by rejecting motivation completely, but by putting it in perspective. By showing you the full picture, not just the sound bites. Jim Rohn gave us timeless wisdom, but wisdom without action is wasted. His words were never meant to be a substitute for effort. They were meant to remind you that effort matters. But the real transformation doesn't happen when you listen. It happens when you apply. So the next time you hear a Jim Rohn quote, don't just nod your head and move on. Ask yourself, how can I use this today? What's one small action I can take right now to put this into practice? Because that's the secret no motivational speaker will ever tell you. Action is the only real motivation. And if you're tired of being sold hype without results, stick with us here at Unhyped. Because we're not here to keep you entertained. We're here to keep you moving.